Hey, Legal Rebels, this is Tom Martin. I'm the founder of LawDroid, and this is my podcast, LawDroid Manifesto, where I interview legal innovators about how they do what they do.
In this episode, I interview Cecilia Zeniti, CEO of GCAI, whose journey from Italian immigrant family to Silicon Valley entrepreneur has uniquely positioned her to revolutionize how in-house legal teams leverage AI.
Welcome to the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. I'm Tom Martin, your host, and I'm thrilled today to have on Cecilia Zeniti, who is the co-founder and CEO of GCAI, but she's also a course instructor with Gen AI and prompting for lawyers with Maven, and the founding member for over 7 years of TechGC. And so I'm really excited to learn more about her career and share that with you. Cecilia, where are you right now? Is that in Northern California?
Yeah, I'm in the Bay Area in California. I've been here, most of my whole career, moved out here after college to work in Silicon Valley. And then that's been kind of a theme throughout my career. Great to be with you, Tom. Thanks for hosting.
Yeah, and thank you, by the way, for participating in the LawDroid AI conference and sharing your amazing product with the audience there.
Good fun. You're clearly have seen what's coming with legal AI before a lot of people. And so it's just fun to hang out, Tom.
For sure. Truly, in preparing to interview today, I went through, your career and the different positions you've held and your education. And to be honest, it's frankly very impressive. And you seem to be kind of at the heartbeat of things as they move forward. So I would say that you yourself are quite ahead of the game in the choices that you've made and the experiences you've had.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely. I feel like maybe this is a little self-reflective but I guess it is a podcast. Is being able to do what I love and see kind of what the next wave is going to be. And now that we've got a technology that is such a good fit for lawyers, it's I just feel so lucky to have been able to do that. And, I think the pace of it and seeing all these big shifts come on, and then now with Gen AI, seeing what it's doing for legal, it's been, really fun to be a part of.
So you're in Burlingame. Did you grow up there?
No, so I grew up in the Midwest. I was born in Italy. My parents came to the US when I was a little kid. I was supposed to be, a couple of weeks and then maybe 6 weeks. And then now it's been 40 odd years that my parents have been in the US. But went to college on the East Coast, was lucky enough to get my first job in tech at that time as a chat moderator for Manchester United's football club. This was back in 2000, and trust and safety and online moderation wasn't a thing, but I was able to get that job from my dorm room. So I actually had my first remote role back in the year 2000. So pretty crazy, but that got me into tech. And then my then boyfriend, now husband, had a job in Silicon Valley and been there ever since.
As my audience knows, I like to go into the origin story of my guests. So I want to go back to the beginning.
All right. Okay. All right. Let's do it.
So you said you were born in Italy. Where in Italy were you born?
I was born in Torino.
Torino. Okay. I actually met my wife in Firenze. Yeah. And know a little bit about Italian, studied undergrad and all that. So that's why I can pronounce things a little bit better than the average bear. So what was that like? Did you move when you were just a baby, or?
I was a little kid. I was 3 years old and came to the US. And then, my parents had my brother and sister. And then eventually, there weren't that many Italians in the St. Louis area where we lived. And this was before, even Starbucks didn't exist then. So it was my parents would, want to order espresso and it'd be like, oh, espresso. And so it was a whole thing. But yeah, no, it definitely certainly being bilingual had a big effect on me. I was always very, into words and speaking and perspectives. But more generally, the immigrant experience, I think, it does encourage entrepreneurship. And I'm super inspired by my dad, where, even though same thing, immigrant parents, work in a profession like law, where you'll always be able to, earn a certain amount of money, American dream, and so on. I always had a very entrepreneurial streak, in part because I think as immigrants, you're sort of always working hard to prove your hustle, right? And that was definitely something that, seeing my dad do inspired me. And so the way it played out in my career, I think, I had increasingly entrepreneurial lawyer jobs. And I think GC is the closest to that, where you're really close to the business. And then eventually kind of woke up one day and then, decided to do my own thing. So definitely been deeply inspired by childhood. You're right to point that out.
Yeah, so St. Louis. So you moved from Italy to St. Louis, and was it like within the city, or was it out in the burbs? Like,
Burbs, little town called O'Fallon, Illinois, on the Illinois side across the river. And my dad literally makes industrial markers, and worked for a company that had a shared owner with Europe, and then eventually, basically decided to start his own thing and found a similar company to what he had been working for. And it was definitely kind of an American success story, because the company he had been working for had been sold to a big conglomerate. They took the customer list, fired all the employees. It was kind of this, like, very much kind of like 90s sort of plot line. But then, our hero, in this case, my dad, was able to come back and start his own thing. And now that business just had, I think it's 23 or 4 year anniversary. Very, very proud and very inspired to have seen that, right? Because, the risk aversion that I think a lot of us have as lawyers, I saw my dad have two kids just about to go to college and start his own thing at that time.
so if you could share a little bit more about that. So, like, I kind of nodded my head, like, yeah, industrial markers, I know what that is, but what exactly is that, and the business around that?
Yeah, so basically my dad's business, like, it was basically manufacturing, and really like doing things with literal, like, if you think, imagine like a Sharpie, it's literally like that, except for companies, and for use on plants, and for use in electrical applications and other things. But growing up, I would go to my dad's office on the weekend and play with the photocopier and whatever. But it's definitely something where, naming products or being close to the customer, or even sales. I think that's something that, having had exposure to somebody doing that, made a big difference for me. And so, I think a lot of lawyers, it's like, or sales gets a bad name, but I kind of love it. I mean, that's definitely played out in our business at GCAI, where, done properly, it's like keeping in touch with friends and helping them out. And like, I would never sell a product that I wouldn't happily pay for with a smile myself. And that's been our North Star on the product side. And I think it's worked, but I think that was largely from my dad. And then, of course, manufacturing logistics matter, right? Where it's like, you got to get, the parts have to come in, the machine has to be running, literally all these operations type of things, that I think perhaps some of my peers in Silicon Valley maybe didn't grow up with. I think coming from hardware, and then I worked for hardware companies as well. I was at Amazon, I was at a robotics company, and that discipline of like literally having to ship physical product, I think makes a
Hmm.
big difference.
And you said, did you grow up speaking Italian in the household, or?
I did, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, I mean, now I always say that I speak like a native, but just kind of not very smart one, because I don't have an accent or anything. And people are like, "Where are you from?" And they kind of just, my vocabulary, certainly on the business side, is not so high in Italian because I don't speak it as much anymore. But yes, I have dual citizenship, and so do my kids.
That's cool. My wife, she grew up speaking Italian and had to learn English here in Canada. Um, that's pretty amazing. Like being in your dad's business, like even after school or like when you're growing up, probably just osmotically, like hearing the conversations about, a product, getting it out there, how to sell it, naming, branding, things like that. It sounds like it made an impression on you.
Absolutely.
Um, how about your mom?
Yeah. So my mom was had gone to school while I was a kid, and kind of when my dad went to be an entrepreneur, she needed to get a job too. But again, being an immigrant, it was sort of difficult. And even though she had a college degree in Europe, it wasn't something that was very particularly easy to find a role. And so she had always been interested in STEM, and so she went to school to be a laboratory technician in healthcare, right? So a very stable job with insurance and so on. And so she did that, and was the breadwinner for a while when my dad got his business off the ground. And so just seeing the grit from that, and then now, as a working mom, that my mom specifically worked in healthcare so that she could get off at 3:30 because they have the like 6 a.m. to 3:30 schedule. I'm like, oh my gosh, God bless. I don't know if I could do that now, but that kind of hard work was definitely something that influenced me a great deal.
Yeah, it sounds like they also have a great partnership in supporting each other.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think about that now of like, hey, because my dad had been offered a role at the conglomerate that bought the original company, and he turned it down, and that must have taken some courage and some partnership for sure. So yeah, I should send them a thank you. Sometimes now that I think my dad seeing me succeed entrepreneurially, and my brother and sister are also doing well is, of course, good, feels good for him, but I do specifically have my parents to thank for that.
So brother and sister too, are you the youngest or the oldest?
I'm
Or?
the oldest, and my brother is in the family business with my dad. In the company's called Umark in St. Louis, and then my sister is actually a relatively famous talent agent in Hollywood. She's at CAA, Creative Artist Agency, and so we're relatively random mix of professions. But yeah, we've been pretty lucky.
Wow, pretty impressive family.
Thank you. You're so kind, Tom.
um, all right, so then moving a step forward, like, so you ended up going to Georgetown, right?
Hmm.
And you got a degree in international studies, summa cum laude, no less.
Oh, thank you. That's kind of you.
Uh, what was that like? What was that experience like going to Georgetown?
I loved Georgetown. Now my oldest is looking at colleges. I have a teenager now who's a junior, and she, thinking about that experience again, it was lovely. Georgetown was a really great liberal arts education, took class in theology and philosophy and logic and all these things that ended up being pretty fundamental, as well as like random fun courses like Russian history, or, I took a class on, uh, you know, consumer economics, and it turned out I ended up becoming a lawyer in the consumer space, and understanding that has been a huge unlock for me. But very much, I mean, I think the Georgetown experience of like, it is very oriented towards law. I read recently that Washington DC has more lawyers per capita than Hollywood has actors, and so definitely affects the culture there. I was recently in DC for a conference, and with the I guess the Doge efforts and some of the trimming down of government, a lot of people are without jobs, and the whole mood in DC was very somber. But at the time that I was there, it was sort of the Clinton era, and it was definitely a thing where it was government and law were really a part of the experience there. And I think here in California, honestly, we're a little bit divorced from national politics because we feel like we're not really part of it, interestingly. And I think that has evolved, but certainly at the time, it was a great place to go to understand government and law. And I definitely got that out of it. And the global thing I think was helpful too. I had the opportunity to study in London, and I randomly got my first tech job in London. I think I mentioned the chat moderator for Manchester United, and that role ended up helping me get a job at Yahoo. So I'm definitely a huge subscriber in the like Steve Jobs, like you can only make sense of your story going backwards, and all the puzzle pieces fit together. It's definitely been the case in my life.
Well, thank you for sharing that because I'm a fervent believer of that too. That you need to kind of explore things that are available to you and see what works and what fits. And it's not necessarily like some predestined thing where you know exactly the way it's going to work. You got to be open to kismet. Um,
Exactly.
yeah, and so you were at the London School of Economics. You get the degree in international studies, and so all of that's amazing. It sounds like a lot of fun too, like the Manchester United thing. So how did that take you in the direction of law, or did it just seem like a natural next step because of Washington and because of there being so many lawyers there?
Yes, I mean, there's a joke at Georgetown that basically everyone either goes to law school or defers and goes to law school. And that's basically was the case. There were a lot of people that were very interested in law, but for me in particular, I always knew that tech would be something that I would be interested in. And, when in the time I graduated in the early 2000s, the economy was pretty bad. And so, my then boyfriend who was in software, he had a job in Northern California and I didn't have a job anywhere in the country. So I was like, okay, I'll come out and do it. And funny enough, I got involved in like Craigslist, had like basically text-based forums, and I met a bunch of people through that. And then eventually was able to, through the Georgetown Alumni Network, the then, senior counsel at Georgetown, Michael Callahan, who's now the CLO of Rivian, eventually became the GC of Yahoo. But essentially, I reached out to him, and at the time, the alumni network of Georgetown was like a piece of paper. Like you'd be like, hey, I'm moving to California, and they'd mail you this thing. It's like, here's the email addresses of the people in California. I don't know why they couldn't email it to you, but anyways, it's a piece of paper. And I literally like reached out to people being like, hey, I'm a new grad, are there any roles at your company? I'm interested in tech, et cetera. And it took a while, but eventually I was able to get the job at Yahoo, which was at the time a super cool company. And so it definitely set me up in that way. And, that's funny enough. On tomorrow, I'm actually talking with the Georgetown Alumni Association because they got wind of the story too and thought it was a cool one. But Yahoo at the time was growing like gangbusters and still competing with Google in the search market. Search was still a relatively new method of advertising at the time. And so now, Google's worth $1 trillion and whatever. And so literally it's funny to think, but Google hadn't even IPO'd yet. It probably had, in the low tens of millions of revenue at the time.
So let's take a step back. Like you said, you're interested in tech, but was there something that kind of gave rise to that? Like, was there some early experience that you had? Were you messing around with, computer, doing some like programming or?
I think, I literally I was on the math team. I met my husband on the math team at the time, but girls in STEM in the 90s, it wasn't like a really big thing. And I always really liked writing and social studies and economics as well. So, I mean, if I had to do a do-over again, I might do something more technical with a major, but I picked it up eventually. I think it was very much, and this is something that is a life philosophy for me even now, is like literally, it sounds cheesy to say, but literally like the lifelong learning, like always be adding skills. I've taken so many classes over the years at Santa Cruz and Stanford and Berkeley and all these places. And even just like if there's random CLEs, like we're actually, some lawyers consider CLEs a burden. I don't. I kind of like it. I really enjoy meeting new people and learning new things. And that's been a really big part of me as a person and me as a journey. And I think tech, in particular, the internet, like it sounds crazy, but I literally think to myself, like, what a time to be alive, right? It's like this weekend, for example, it was Easter weekend, and I'm getting the Easter dinner ready, and I realized that I had planned to make rolls and salmon. And for some reason, I misplanned and I didn't realize that I would have the salmon in the oven when I wanted to bake the rolls. So I literally am like, let me ask ChatGPT, can you make rolls in the air fryer? And ChatGPT, I mean, I could even pull it up, is like, you sure can. Here's how you do it. And it was like, all right, preheat the air fryer to 375, make 8 to 10 little balls of dough and dip them in this. And ChatGPT at the end even said, hey, would you like a variant where it's stuffed with cheese? And I said, sure thing. And then next thing I know, I'm putting string cheese into balls of dough, and it was absolutely delicious. So that's kind of a funny example, but I think the internet was the same way, where it was like anything that you can know for a curious kid. For me, the internet really did hit. Like I remember seeing the dancing baby video. I had this first job in tech. I literally remember the first time I Googled anything. Of course, I Googled myself because vanity, but it found my like high school tennis scores. And I'm like, oh my God, how did it find this on the internet? And it was like this moment of like the internet plus, the ability to retrieve information. And now, that's what AI is. It's just trained on the entirety of the internet. So when I think about these early formative experiences I had reading content, moderating the website for the soccer team, just having this insatiable curiosity, I think that for me has made a huge difference. And that's what AI is. It's just a mechanic to amplify everyone's curiosity. There's nothing that you can not only not find, but have someone explain it to you. If you want to be taught the concept of a 1031 real estate exchange, you go to ChatGPT, you can spend half an hour conversing and having it taught to you. On the legal side in GCAI, we literally, one of our official prompts is explain a concept to me in 3 different ways. And it'll do that in different levels of depth. So yeah, I would say the early experience is more just like the knowledge seeking and kind of power of the internet was what inspired me very early.
Well, I think that is a commonality with a lot of people I talk to, is that curiosity, that's insatiable curiosity. And I love your story about, ChatGPT acting as kind of like a sous chef uh, to help you whip that up together. It is a tool that helps us amplify curiosity, and I love the way that you phrase that. It's something that we can use to, and I think that's the best way to use it, right? Not necessarily to create the thing, because everybody's focused on that, but like the amplification of curiosity and learning more about different things. And yeah.
Exactly. And I mean, I think there's like I can't remember which physicist, maybe it's Carl Sagan, but I don't think it's somebody else, but that like the boundaries of our ignorance are actually endless, right? Because there's things you can know, but there's always going to be an infinite amount that you don't. And so that's what's so exciting, is that we just kind of like way increase the boundaries of what we don't know with this technology.
Yeah, that's frightening and thrilling at the same time.
Exactly. That was exactly my reaction. Exactly.
So, okay, so you graduate from Bolt, then you go to work at Yahoo, and then you did some, typical work as a associate at Morrison Forster in technology, though. And then one thing I want to jump to, though, which kind of is again on the pulse of stuff, is when you go to work at Amazon, it's with Alexa/Echo in kind of like the incipient part of it getting launched, and you kind of like experienced that ride, right? What was that like?
Yeah, so Alexa, this was a funny career story. So when I was at Morrison Forster, and I'd been seconded to a Cupertino-based consumer electronics company, but anyways, working on a famous phone, but litigation for a famous phone, and then got a call from a recruiter about Amazon, and I said, "Oh, interesting. They must be interested in my mobile phone experience," because at the time Amazon was rumored to be creating a phone, which of course they were. It turned out to be one of Amazon's relatively rare flops. It was called the Fire Phone, and it had cameras and whatever, but it just came to the party too late. There was already Android, there was already iPhone. It was just kind of too late. But when I joined the company, I kind of show up on my first few days, and they said something like, "So we're going to have the senior attorneys work on the phone, because that's a really, really important initiative. You're a little bit more junior. We're going to have you work on these like kind of other projects." And there's this voice device. It's called Doppler. That code name has been exposed, but it's called Doppler. It doesn't really work. It kind of like it works sometimes. It's not that reliable. But anyways, the team is going to like you because you're into privacy, whatever. Talk to them. And that turned out to be Alexa. And it was this like career move of a lifetime, because from a privacy standpoint, from a tech adoption standpoint, it was like, I mean, there were people who had worked on voice technology, like, interactive voice technology, like, when those early days when you would call like United and be like, "Let me look up your flight," click, 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 and then it would do that. That was a precursor to Alexa. And so Alexa was really Jeff Bezos's vision around, we can have AI in our everyday lives. Like the voice technology is there, the understanding technology to convert what you're saying into words understandable by a computer. And then TTS is the third acronym, but text to speech, to take something, voice, and articulate it. So the putting together of those 3 technologies and seeing all the legal side of that and the business side of that was amazing. It was really, really lucky. And being able to see the product go from like not really understanding what I said to being really good to eventually now understanding my 3 and 4-year-old very clearly was another formative one. But yeah, the amount of, then once I got a taste of that, of like the product counsel role, it definitely became part of my brand that I was going to be this business forward lawyer and kind of work on that, and have been fortunate to do that since.
Well, I've been a big fan and user of Echoes ever since they came out, and I actually had to take down the one I have because she would have reminded me of my next appointment and interrupted us. But I have Alexa running as an assistant in the background, kind of keeping me on track.
Good stuff. I love it.
So after your role at Amazon, you worked for a robotics company, then you worked for like an autonomous vehicle company. Was it just because you were involved with Amazon that just these other opportunities were in the air? Like, it's just pretty amazing that those two things came up.
I love my time at Amazon, and the leadership principles, quite literally the original 14 leadership principles that Bezos espoused, and were very much a part of the culture, are part of me now too. Where I've even thought about implementing them at GCAI, and bias for action and all the things. You can look them up, but they're some of the company's biggest asset. So that really the substantive ability. I mean, the name Amazon obviously does help open doors, and I think from a robotics perspective, like Amazon has gotten into robots, and so when I met the founders of Anki, the robotics company, it was I was a pretty natural fit to be hired there. But for me, that role was, I loved it, but that role was definitely learning how to become a general counsel. I thought I was a pretty good lawyer before then, but being a GC and really having the end-to-end responsibility for, corporate and privacy and commercial and every aspect of that. It set up my career thereafter. But robotics itself, it was fun. The company made it, basically, it was a toy, but it had all the path planning and other things that real robots have. And that's a technology that's come so far in the time since that time. And the founders now of that company, the company ended up, hardware is very difficult, it's very expensive and needs a lot of capital. But they ended up becoming part of Waymo, and so they're working on that. But definitely learned how to support a founder, how to support a CEO. Really, loved that role. And then the company eventually, ran out of money, and so helped them with that. But it was a great opportunity. And then thereafter, Cruise was a natural fit because it was autonomous driving. And that's been fascinating to see now here in San Francisco. You see the Waymo cars all over the place. So definitely feels like the future. And I think they're coming to Florida. I think they are coming. So you'll see them.
It's definitely the future, but still, like, I guess for me, a little off-putting. Just getting in the car and having to go, just having to put my faith in the car. But after a while, you get used to it. It's just it's kind of like jumping into cold water for me.
Exactly.
So, I mean, after that, you worked at Bloom Tech, and that was like definitely like putting together a lot of things I think that you had experienced before. Like, definitely that was a general counsel role, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I loved it. And, I look at, again, I think one thing in startups, you really want to appreciate how much working in a startup at all, let alone as at the executive level, is really working for a founder. So Austin Allred is the founder of Lambda School and now Bloom Tech, and he is just a force. And it's clear to me when I met him, and now too, that whatever he does is going to have a measure of success because he has this like clairvoyance about the future. And that, in his case, it was education. So basically Lambda School's thing was, it was a technical education that you don't pay for unless and until the student gets a job in the field. And that was 50 states of employment law, 50 states of lending law, federal lending law, education law. So it really was a situation where I always tell people, if you want a GC role in a regulated industry, it's a business role. And so that was this, where literally we had a regulatory roadmap of states who were going to unblock and additional, things we were going to offer in different states based on my team's work at the time. Yeah, it was great. I think I also realized that I think I needed to work in pure tech from there. And so
Yeah.
that, but it was a great experience in Austin. I still keep in touch.
And then you founded your own firm, right?
I did, yeah. So, something that I think has gotten a lot of play is the idea of being a fractional GC. And so that's what I did. I knew that I wanted my next role to be very like I wanted an amazing GC role. And I knew that, because of these quirks around, sort of the industry, the economy, like, the fact that the GC role is so close to the CEO, I knew it was going to take me a little while to get the one that I wanted. Meanwhile, pay the bills. And this is something, again, immigrant parents, being a lawyer is you're always going to be guaranteed a certain salary or be able to sell your services even by the hour. And so I was able to find basically a part-time role for a company. And then so I had an anchor client, and then I had a few just kind of other clients for ad hoc projects. And it really gave me the time to figure out what I wanted to do next. And there was a very good article, and maybe we can drop in the show notes, in the Atlantic by a researcher called something about explore then exploit. Basically, this idea that periods of great success in a career are usually preceded by some period where you're curious and exploring and figuring things out. An example in that article was like Einstein famously worked at the patent office. And he, was pretty efficient. He would examine patents in the morning and then, got the same amount of work done as others in half the time. And so he would spend the afternoon just learning about astrophysics and all the stuff he eventually went on to further do. And so for me, the ability to not work full time and have my own firm and work sort of 3/4 hours, I would say, left a lot of headspace to explore. And that's when I sort of realized I needed to, I fell more in love with AI than I even had been, and knew that I wanted to work at a company that did a lot of AI, and eventually found Replit and really admired the CDO, admired the company, and so went there.
When I look at the different moves that you've made and everything we just talked about, you have this exposure to startups and learning a lot from those different founders and how they're making choices to grow their company. And then you working on it from, the general counsel perspective, but at the same time, a lot of lessons learned about how you grow and found a company. Then, you performing that role as a fractional kind of expanded your ability to have your hand in a bunch of different companies and seeing how they're growing. All of this sounds to me like ultimately informed in a great way your ability to kind of kill two birds with one stone. Like the fact that GCAI is not only a startup, but that it's mirroring your experience as a GC, it's a great magnification of that experience. And I'm just kind of curious, like when you were looking at different opportunities that you could have available to you, what made that spark for you? Like the fact, because it could have been a play of just doing some kind of application of generative AI outside of the law, because there's plenty of opportunities for that, and perhaps that market would actually be much more expansive than legal tech. What focused you on that? What made that attractive for you?
I briefly toyed, you'll appreciate this, but it's part of the origin story of the company. I'm like, I should do a Santa Claus AI because there's like these Santa Claus letters and it's such a delight for children. We could do that. I said with my co-founder. Ridiculous to think about now, but it's like this technology, I couldn't stop thinking of applications for it. And then when I thought about go to market, it's like, well, what do I know best? And what is a market that is a great consumer of this, right? So I taught these classes on Maven, and I would see how lawyers would adopt AI. And ChatGPT is a great tool. It is not a great tool for a lawyer. It's not there yet. And the hallucinations and the usability and the privacy security aspects, and these were things that I perceived to be fixable. And I have a brilliant co-founder, and I would teach classes in the morning and talk with him in the afternoon and say, hey, we got to show our sources, or GC really wants to be able to do internet research. I don't really use Lexis as a GC. I never really did. And so being able to build the product I would have wanted has been a huge unlock. Now, that being said, they say like, what is it? They say like niche to get rich, right? Like this is presumably a niche, but you know what? Like Twitter started as like, just let me just post what I had for breakfast kind of thing. Like these things become much bigger. And, Figma is a company that we are super inspired by. And people are like, design software, there's Adobe, you're never gonna get market share. And then now, Figma, I believe, just announced their IPO and they're worth more than $20 billion because they've expanded. It's not just designers that use it now. People that comment on designs go into Figma. And Canva has, millions and millions of users, 95% of the Fortune 500 using design software. But then, my 13-year-old uses it for birthday invitations because it's just really good cloud-based collaborative software. And now it has AI. And so I think, the legal market, when we were doing, addressable market analysis for VCs and things, we all know how big it is. It's in the trillions globally, right? And you think about, I went to I think you were there as well. There was the TLTF summit that, what's his name, puts on down in Florida by you. And Zach, I forget his last name, but anyway, Zach puts it on there. And he did a great presentation that's like, hey, there's 33 million small businesses in America, and most of them don't have a lawyer, which is fine. But would they seek the advice of a strategic guidance if they could? Would they ask, ChatGPT questions, or would they ask my AI questions if we prove to be better for legal? Yeah, they would. And so, I think when people ask me about the impact of AI on legal, I think it's going to be like, when Excel came out, there was a reduction in the number of people titled bookkeeper, but there's been an increase in the need for finance assistance, right? And, strategic finance is a profession, and elevating the role of the CFO. That's all since regular bookkeeping is a given. Anybody can use Quicken. And so I think this is another example that I'm pretty bullish on the legal profession. I do think if I was a law student now, I would still try to learn the traditional way, but I would also become really good with AI if I was a law student now.
So that makes a lot of sense that, like in a way that you were your own beta tester because you yourself are a general counsel and you can see it through the lens of somebody approaching it as general counsel, GC.ai. You're able to funnel down to particular use cases and make them effective. That sounds like it probably saved a lot of time.
Yeah, my co-founder and I were like, we started on third base on that. Like, it's been really like we found product market fit almost immediately because I was the market and could very quickly inform it. I think, I don't take that for granted, but I also, it's just going to be an unfair advantage for us, and something that, in our pitch decks and everything like that, it's like, what's your unfair advantage? Like, well, I'm the ICP here. The ideal customer is myself. And, you hear of companies with founder CEOs tend to do better than professional CEOs over time. There's data on this. And part of it is that North Star of like, what does the company mean? What is it doing? Are you taking the risks? How bought in are you? But yeah, absolutely. That was a huge one. I think it's also, it is a higher opportunity cost, right? So like I went to a dinner with Oric. They have an AI practice group, which is lovely. I highly recommend them, and my old firm, Morrison and Forster. And, someone with AI expertise, a partner with AI expertise, is probably breaking $2,000 an hour. So if I think about that, I'm like, I should have been charging a lot more for my solo practice, but it just motivates me to work harder and do it by software.
And who's your co-founder, by the way?
His name's Bardia Purvakil, and he and I met at Replit.
Wow. Technical side?
Yeah, he's very technical. He was early on working with AI, kind of before it was cool, before there was a title called AI engineer, and working with early models. He had been before Replit, which was a product for software engineers. He had been at a company called Rome Research, which made like a network note taking app that a lot of very technical people use. And so he's really good at kind of envisioning information, envisioning how people encounter it, and able to do both the design and the engineering, which was super important early days. And now he's got a team and everything, and we've scaled, but there's definitely magic in having a pairing between kind of engineering and, in my case, sales, marketing, the really deep connection with the customer.
So one thing I've been really impressed by what you do is that because it's such a tight fit with what people actually like, what general counsel, what in-house counsel actually use and do from day to day, that it just feels like natural for them to use your product. And I'm just curious as to, because the other side of the coin is that there's been a lot of companies that have focused on legal tech, that have focused on particular use cases like in-house, but they met with different barriers because there hasn't been as much of an uptake with in-house counsel that's trying to convince people that tech is the way or that AI is the way. But what I've seen with what you do is that you've been able to bust through those barriers essentially as if they're not there. And how do you think you do that? Other than the fact that you're coming to it from, with the eyes of a GC, how do you explain that?
Selling to in-house counsel was very intentional. And I think we're better consumers of software because in-house, particularly at tech companies, we use the software that our clients do, that our stakeholders do, right? So if you're getting pinged by people in Slack, you're using Slack. If you need to, you're on the work with compliance and there's some compliance software that's being used, you use that. Obviously, if you're on the IP side, you interface with the patent office software, which is not particularly advanced, but in any event, like we're used to adapting. And one of the key, I think, markers of success of an in-house counsel is, can you adapt to make your legal advice effective at your company? And so that adaptability is actually a quality of our ideal customer. Like, can they try something new? Can they, in using our product, can we make it good enough that there isn't a big learning curve? And so that targeting in-house, I think, has been a big difference maker for us. And now the software is very good. And so we do get law firms that want to use the product, and we've got some law firm customers, although it's not the focus. So that's kind of thing one. Thing two is like, you use the term legal tech, and it's been something that I've been talking with the team. I don't necessarily consider us legal tech. We're just regular good software that lawyers are the clients of. And I think there's some baggage with legal tech, right? Like, we had an investor very early on ask us, or a potential investor that didn't get to invest, ask us like, hey, how are you going to sell to lawyers without having access to Lexis and Westlaw? And the guy's like, how are they going to shepherdize cases? And I was like, I have not shepherdized a case since, God, I don't know, law school. Like, that's not a thing that a transactional attorney or a product counsel does. I hadn't used, at that point, I had been at Amazon. I hadn't used Lexis or Westlaw since the firm. And so, like, it just reflected this idea of, like, there's a lot of, I guess, received wisdom in legal tech that I actually feel pretty lucky to be naive of. And, I can be an insider to the legal profession without being an incumbent. And that's been a huge advantage because I can talk with GCs, and it's not, I think now there's a lot of like sales reps and stuff. Oh, I'll send you a Stanley Cup to take a call with me. I'm like, I got enough Stanley Cups. I don't need that. Like most GCs, that's not going to work. Versus, okay, I'm going to meet you at a conference, or I'm going to meet you at the Tech GC, or I'm going to hear from a friend about it. And so that's been another big thing. And it's not to say that traditional legal tech can't be amazing. Like there's absolutely great software that does that. There's software. I was talking to a GC in the pharma space, basically, and there's some software, I don't remember the name of it, but basically you can put in the name of a chemical and get like all the provenance of what are the different things in there, and you can prepare your safety data sheets very quickly. And she said that was incredible software, and I think that's great. In our case, I didn't need to, like the legal job, it's legal and business, and AI is so good, it allowed us to leapfrog a lot of the received wisdom we were able to leapfrog. Yeah, it's been a big thing. I think the naivete, though, I always tell my team, like, what is it? I don't know if this is actually true, but there's this idea that, bumblebees, if you look at like the physics, they like shouldn't be able to fly because they're like have this big fat body and the wings are like so thin. But like they don't know that, so they just do it anyway. So like that's kind of how I look at it. And I think it's an advantage. And that, plus I do think optimism is a superpower, and I think I have that.
That's awesome. I really love that. the strength of being an insider without being an incumbent. You know,
Yeah.
that is a superpower. Um, but with the time we have left, I do want to get to those couple of questions that I have for you. Um, one of which is for the audience that's watching and listening. You do so much. You have your hands in a lot of things. You know, you're the founder and CEO of GCAI. You're also working, teaching people about this stuff, as well as Tech GC, which is a great way of bringing people together that are general counsel. How do you do it? Like, how do you do all that and family, and like, how do you balance that?
When people ask these questions, like, okay, like when you're like in seventh grade and you're in grade school, people are like, oh, in junior high, you'll never be able to do that. You'll have to just step it up. And then in junior high, they're like, oh, high school, it's so hard. If you forget to put your name on your paper, you get a zero. And then in high school, it's like, oh my God, college, you have to like prepare for your own exams, and then law school, and then life, and then whatever. And so I feel like there's an expression again in Italian called gli esami non finiscono mai, which is exams never end, which is like there's always going to be something that if you want to step up and do it, you can do it. And this is like not that profound, but I think like the way to do it is to do it. Like, and so whatever, I genuinely believe like whatever you set your mind to with hard work and learning and leaning on friends and whatever it is, you can get there. And, I can't do it all at once. Like I will say, like I love to cook. And since becoming a founder CEO, like I don't cook that much. I have these like internet like factor meals, which are like sort of disgusting. It's literally like a glorified TV dinner, which is like really sad. Like you don't see those if you listen, you don't see Tom's face, but he just like grimaced. So like, yeah, you can't have it all at once, but if you decide you want to have something, you put one foot in front of the other. That's been kind of my advice is like, and you have to do the work, right? Like, the reason that I was able to get the job at Amazon, I did a lot more Snow Forester and I reviewed lots of discovery and I was part of the Apple Samsung case. And, there's not a, doc review I didn't love at the time. So, you put in your work, but then you can get there. And I think you're right, Tom, you said at the top of the hour, there has to be some opportunity for Kismet, but I always try to do that. But yeah, do I have bad days? Like, of course I do. I had a kid had like hand, foot, and mouth or whatever. There's like random stuff that happens all the time. But you look up at the end of, a quarter or a year and you're like, wow, like, my kids are growing and business is growing and whatever. And so you kind of just keep doing it.
And so maybe this naturally ties into that. But my last question is for you, like at the end of the day, what makes it all worthwhile?
I mean, I think on the business side, working with so many different people and customers is really, really fun and satisfying. So we have a feedback channel so we don't see your chats. We've got, privacy, security, SOC 2, et cetera. But if you thumb up or down, then me and a couple members of engineering see it. And when we get feedback, we got one that was like, dear God, I can't believe, I have this document done in, 5 minutes or whatever it was. Or another person was like, I haven't had access to GCI for 3 days while we get your contract done. It feels like I'm missing my right arm. And I hear stuff like that. I'm like, oh my God, like to be able to have this idea and pursue it and have this impact on people's lives. I would say that's the most motivating. And then just in general, like, I don't know, I think maybe it's the immigrant parent thing. I just don't like to have the grass grow under my feet. So I think those two things. And then on the kids side, I mean, having a business is very similar to having kids where, the days are long, but the years are short. And so that's, I would say, the other motivating thing for me.
Well, those are definitely great words of wisdom. And I just want to thank you so much for spending some time with me today.
This was really fun, Tom. Thank you. And yeah, for your listeners, check us out at getgc.ai or soon to be gc.ai. We offer free trials and so on. And any friend of Tom's, I would love to work with. So thanks so much.
Yeah, molta grazie per tutti.
Ah, grazie. Bravo. All right. Thanks so much. This was lovely.
And for all of you watching, see you next time.
Thank you so much for watching the latest episode of the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. To keep in the loop about upcoming episodes, please subscribe to LawDroid Manifesto and you'll get notified. Thanks for watching. See you next time.